interesting enough to hold the attention of everyone who's listening to it. Very little that I know. There is no written documents or history kept of the family. All I know is this, that my grandfather Simmons was born in the state of Iowa, and also my grandmother Simmons was born in Iowa, and her maiden name was Eggleston. Perlina Eggleston was her name. And my grandfather's full name was George Simmons. And now that's as far back as I know of any of their ancestors. I know that I was never fortunate enough to see my grandfather. He passed away years before I was born. As a matter of fact, I never did see but one of my four grandparents, and that was my grandmother Simmons. I knew her. She lived till, I was 16, 17 years old when she expired. And but my grandfather Simmons, he passed away he was in the prime of his life. I think he was only 46 years old when he expired. But he was in the Civil War. When the Civil War broke out, he was 18 years old. And he joined up thinking that he would have a choice of the branch of service or who he would be under the command of. And so he joined at the outbreak of the Civil War. And he went through the 4 years of the Civil War. And I guess that he was a real veteran when the thing was over. He was in several of the major battles, and he even marched through, he had the 400-mile march with Sherman down through Georgia and the Carolinas, and he even broke, with carrying heavy packs, army packs, he broke the arches of his feet down. And, all I know is the stories that my grandmother would tell, and she would tell some once in a while to us, but the first great battle that he was in was at the Battle of Shiloh, fought on the 6th and 7th of April, 1862. And he came out of that battle without any wounds, but he had a narrow escape. I've heard my grandmother tell about he in the line of fire, the weapons they used was mostly muzzle loaders, especially at the start of the war. And he had fired his rifle and had just stooped to knee level to reload. And as he bent his elbow to replace another charge in the end of his rifle, a bullet passed between his arm and his body and hit his pal that he bunked with. At that time, the two, you had a buddy, and you camped together and lived together. Each one had a half of a pup tent, and at night you put the two halves together and make a tent. But well, the bullet passed under his arm and hit his buddy in the throat and ruined his voice box. And so that was, he visited him at every opportunity while he was in the Army hospital, and finally, but he couldn't speak. He had lost his voice. So after the war was over, he went to visit him. And when I don't know what town it was, but anyway, it was close by. They lived pretty close to one another in their civilian life. But anyway, this buddy of his, old Army buddy, came to the door and spoke to him. And he was so surprised, asked him what had happened, that he had recovered, and he said, well, he'd had an operation And even medical science in its primitive stages at that time, I guess, was having a few breakthroughs. Anyway, that they had help him recover his voice. But anyway, he went through the Civil War. When the war was over, he came back to his home, and how he met and how soon afterwards. It must have been soon afterwards that he when he returned from the war, that he met my grandmother, and they were married. And they lived there in Iowa for several years. Well, a few years anyway. Let's see, there was Aunt Mary and Uncle Ike and Wesley and Lorne and Mother were all born there before, and I guess that he was having a pretty hard time surviving and providing a livelihood, so he heard about this rich plains land in western Kansas, that you could go there and homestead and build your home. And so he up and my grandmother and granddad, and they left for western Kansas. And when they got out there on the plains, it was unsettled and a very primitive frontier. And they built a sod house, and they lived in this sod house and tried to develop the land, and they did to some extent. But and of course every family had to have a certain amount of money to buy the essentials with. And the only means that he could find for bringing in enough money to buy the necessities of life was the buffalo that had roamed the plains by the millions was just about all destroyed. By that time, that was in the early 80s, I believe it was, 1880, because my mother was born in 1876, and she was, I think, 3 or 4 years old when they moved out there. But he would gather, and he would go out on the plains and pick up these buffalo bones by the wagon load and take them to the railroad station. And there they, at that time, that's the way that they filtered sugar beets to make sugar. And they had a buyer at these stations that would buy these bones. And he would pick these buffalo bones up by the wagon load and haul them in there. And I think he got the great sum of, I believe they said, $1.50 a load. And then but anyway, I guess they had some experiences there on the plains. I remember my mother or grandmother telling about one time they had a prairie fire, and they could see it coming for miles and miles, and they knew it was going to pass through their home place there. And Granddad was gone from home, picking up the buffalo bones. Well, the boys, Uncle Ike and Uncle Lorne, they were old enough to they could do farm work. Anyway, they hooked up to this here prairie plow, and they plowed a strip around the buildings and the crop. The hay was in the stack, and said that they got this strip wide enough to where it stopped the fire by them being ready to put out any sparks that might light on a building or something. They saved the crop and the home and everything, though. And then one other incident is telling about that one night when Granddad was gone from home, and I guess it's because the wool, the prairie wolves, they could smell this food in the house, and they'd come and they would try to break in the house, this sod house. That they'd be digging at the crop, and the boys was old enough that they could shoot at them and scare them off. But anyway, that's getting ahead of myself here. Talking about the family. Uncle Ike Simmons was the oldest child, and I don't know what year he was born, and that's how little a record that was kept, of the family records. And then the next was Aunt Mary Hussey. She married a fellow by the name of Hussey, and she was next to the oldest. And then Uncle Lorne. No, I believe it was the one that died when he was 14, Uncle Wesley. And then Uncle Lorne. And then my mother. And then Aunt Laurie. And Aunt Lottie. No, after mother was Uncle Bill. And then Aunt Laurie. And then Aunt Lottie. And then Aunt Addie. Now, Aunt Addie was only 6 weeks old when my grandfather Simmons died. But getting back to western Kansas, this Uncle Wesley, he was just a boy, 13 to 14 years old, and he was sickly. And the doctor advised my grandparents. That was right after Eureka Springs had become famous as a health resort. And so the local doctor there advised grandmother and grandfather to go to Eureka Springs for his health, for the boy's health. So they up and they just moved off and left the homestead that hadn't been improved up on yet. And they loaded up the wagons, and I think there was 2 or 3 families of their neighbors. They was getting kind of sick and tired of the roughing it out on the frontier anyway. So they all took off, and they were 21 days going from western Kansas down to Eureka Springs. Well, he got down there, and they homesteaded and bought some land and homesteaded some. Down there, close to where my grandparents are buried. It's called Oak Hill. But the farm was down on a little creek called Owl Creek. And there they lived till my grandfather died. He died just a few years after they went to Arkansas. Then my grandmother, she went over there east about 4 or 5 miles and bought a farm, because the boys were all grown there. Some of them were grown then, Uncle Lorne and Uncle Ike. And Uncle Wesley, he died, I think he only lived a year or so after they come to Arkansas, and he died. Then Uncle Ike, the oldest one, he married a woman there, and I don't think he ever owned any land, but he lived out there on a little 40 acres of land that joined their old home place. And one cold winter day, Uncle Ike and Uncle Lorne and Uncle Dutch Hussey, the one that married Aunt Mary, and another fellow, I don't know who the other one was, but anyway, there was 4 of them, and they went to Eureka Springs. Well, Uncle Ike, he always had an mania for old guns. He was always buying an old muzzle-loading gun, they said, or an old pistol or something, and he was always overhauling them and tinkering with them. Well, he went in this second-hand shop over there in Eureka Springs that day, and he bought this old shotgun. Well, it was. They started back home, and it was an awful cold day, so they was in a wagon. So would two of them would walk to keep warm, and while the other two rode in the wagon. Well, Uncle Ike and I believe it was Uncle Dutch was walking. Well, Uncle Lorne and ever who else was with him, I don't know who it was, they thought they'd have some fun and they'd run off and leave him. So they whipped up the horses and started to run. Well, Uncle Ike, he was afraid this old shotgun it was loaded, and he was afraid that the jolt of it might set it off. So he run up and reached over the edge of the wagon bed, got it by the barrel, and was going to pull it out of the wagon. And as it came out under the spring seat, I pulled the hammer back and fired, and the muzzle of the gun was right against his arm, and he shot his arm off. Well, they a bunch of young fellows, and they had never had any training or any instructions on what to do in case of emergency. And instead of putting a tourniquet on it, why, they took a horse off of the wagon and run to Eureka Springs to get a doctor. Well, by the time that they got the doctor, I think they was a house close by there, and they put him in the house. But anyway, by the time the doctor got there, he had bled to death. So that's not a very pleasant story to tell you yet. But anyway, that's the way it was. Well, my mother and Dad met, and she was 19 years old when they got married. And then there was Uncle Bill. He was younger than Mother. I think he got married, and I think he'd been married 3 times in his life. And then, let's see, there was, I forgot now how many I said there was of them. There was Ike and Lorne, or Aunt Mary, and Lorne, and Wesley, and Mother, and Bill, and Lori, and Addie, or Lottie and Addie. There's 9. I had 9 children. Well, they have all. I have one aunt left alive, and that's Aunt Addie Walker. She married, and she lives there in a rest home in Monette, Missouri, I believe. And my Aunt Lori Taylor, she married a fellow by the name of Ike Taylor. They went to Texas after children, most of them were grown and married, and most of them down there in Texas, I think. And she expired in Texas. And then Aunt Lottie, she expired in Uniontown, and she married a fellow by the name of Marshall Holt, and she moved up near Fort Scott, Kansas. There she lived. She's gone now. And then Aunt Mary Hussey, the oldest girl, she lived there in Arkansas until she had raised her family, and then they went to up to southwest Missouri and bought a little farm, and they lived there until the Army bought that land up during the war and put an Army camp in there, and then they had to move into town, and she lived there until she expired. And Uncle Bill, I think he took up that old theory that it's cheaper to move than to pay rent. He moved so many times, I don't know how many times he did move. And anyway, he started out with 80 acres of land and a house and barn on it. And he traded and moved till he ended up with nothing. The children had to go and buy him a home and put him in it. And I hope that none of his kids get a hold of what I've said, but that's the fact. And then Uncle Lorne and Aunt Effie, he married twice. The first time he married half-breed Indian, Osage Indian, and they had one child, Lloyd. And then she died, and he married a woman by the name of Effie. Effie Champlin was her name, maiden name. And they lived there in Arkansas, for a long, long time. And finally, they went up to Missouri and bought a farm up there close to where my brother Reuben lived now. And they lived there till they died. Let's see, I guess that's all of them. But I can't give you if I was to undertake to give you the history and the vital statistics of every one of my relatives, it'd take from now till doomsday. So, but I'll just know that there's a lot of them that I've lost track of, and some of them that has expired and we know of. But it's like the legend about when someone made the comment to Abe Lincoln that the only fault they could see of him was he was so homely, and he answered by saying that he felt proud of being homely because he felt that he was among God's chosen people, because he made so many of them like him. So I sometimes wonder if the name Summers wasn't one of God's favorite names, because he created so many by the name of Summers. So anyway, as I go on down the line, I'll give some little happenings of the nearest relatives and family that I think would be of interest. We can look back, and I wish I knew more about my ancestors. Whether we'd be happy to or not, I don't know. It's like, but as far as I know, none by our name has ever committed any disgraceful act. But I haven't had any access to the national vital statistics. Like a cousin of mine one time, he spent his career in the Navy. He was stationed in different places around over the world. And he was assigned once to the office work there in the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. And he said, well, not having any close friends or associates, to fulfill a lifetime ambition of his, why, on off hours, he could go down there at the Pentagon to the Vital Statistics Bureau and look up the family tree, So he said he started in, and he said the farther he got, the more interested he got. And he said he could hardly wait till off hours to get down there and study. And he said everything went fine until he got back to his great-grandfather on his mother. He decided he'd look up his mother's side of the thing first. So he got down there to where just looking up the pedigree of his great-grandfather. And he said he come to a disappointing stop all at once. He said he'd come to where he left Virginia at the dead hours of midnight with a posse in hot pursuit. And he thought, well, that's about time to stop this research. So, and he'd laugh about it. So I don't know. I hope that if I ever get an opportunity to make a family tree, it won't be disappointed. So anyway, I'll try to give a few more uh, happenings of one that I think is close to our family as we go along. So if we if I think of anything, as I think of it, I'll put it down, but we'll not try to make any famous things because I don't know of any outstanding events that has occurred. Well, as far as my own personal life, it I can tell you before we start in that there's nothing very outstanding or exciting other than I think I was a average come from an average farm family. I was born and raised on a farm in Arkansas, and like everybody else, everybody had to work to survive. And what we liked in money, we was rich in love and respect and devotion for ourselves and family and our fellow man. And I look back now, and at that time, I thought we were being deprived of a lot of things in life that I can see now was worth more to us than uh, worldly treasures. We had we had a good living. We as we got older, of course, we had to find other means of employment other than the little farm we lived on. So I worked out, and so did my older brothers, at most any kind of a job that come along. I worked for my Uncle Andrew Summers. When I went to work for him when I was about 15, 16, I guess, and done a man's work and got a man's pay. If you could call $2 a day a man's pay. And, well, that was the standard wage, though, for everybody. And we, as we got older, of course, we had to start thinking about getting settling down and having some kind of a future. So well, I remember first trip I made from home was I went out to western Kansas to the wheat harvest. I think I was only about between 17, 18 years old, and I growed up in a hurry out there. I found out that I was still had a ways to go before I was matured enough to conquer the world, but it was a good experience, and I made pretty good money. Then I worked in the cannon factory there in summertime, and then in the wintertime, my uncle that I worked for most of the time, he always had a big bunch of cattle and hogs, and they had to be taken care of in the wintertime, so that give us employment in the wintertime. And we all didn't take much money. If it did, we wouldn't have made it. But my dad, he always raised a big crop of watermelons, and that was our money crop. And that was before they shipped in melons, you know. And he had a pretty good thing. He was a good watermelon grower, and we had a pretty good income from the watermelons. And it took lots of work to raise them, but it didn't take too long to raise a crop of melons. About 90 days from the time you planted, you were gathering watermelons. And we'd haul them to Berryville and Eureka Springs and all the towns around there. And if there was a sale or anything, public sale, you'd take all the watermelons to that. And we had no trouble selling the melons. And of course, we didn't get much. I think we got he'd get about a cent a pound for them after hauling them to Berryville or Eureka Spring. He'd sell them to the market there, buying them. And for as far as pleasure and pastime, we didn't have much time for that. Only Kings River running right through our farm, and it was the rivers there in the Ozarks is just at that time, before pollution, they were just as clear and as water